When we talk about the idea that God positioned you as a mirror to expose what a narcissist cannot face in themselves, we step into a space that is both deeply uncomfortable and profoundly important. Narcissists are often masters at creating illusions, hiding behind masks of charm, confidence, or control. They project this version of themselves into the world, but deep inside, there are parts of them they cannot bear to acknowledge, parts filled with insecurity, shame, and fear of inadequacy. Your presence, your authenticity, your willingness to show up as yourself with all your flaws and your light disrupted that illusion. You became the mirror that reflected back to them truths they spent their whole lives trying to avoid. And while that was painful for you, it was also part of something bigger than you may have realized at the time. When you stood in front of them, you were not only seeing who they pretended to be, you were also revealing who they were not. This is why narcissists often become so reactive, so defensive, and even cruel when confronted with people who embody honesty, vulnerability, and authenticity. These qualities expose the cracks in their carefully crafted mask, and that exposure feels unbearable to them. You may have wondered why they reacted so strongly to your presence, why they seemed to target you, or why they were relentless in trying to make you feel small. It wasn't because you were weak or easy to manipulate. It was because you carried something they could not control, and that something was truth. Think about the times when you simply showed kindness, when you offered empathy, when you spoke your mind with clarity and courage. To you, those were just natural expressions of who you are, but to them, it was a piercing light shining on their shadows. They could not stand in that light without being reminded of what they lacked. And so, in many ways, your role in their life became one of reflection. You reflected back to them what they were running from. You reflected the emptiness behind their pride, the fragility behind their aggression, and the fear behind their arrogance. That mirror was not something they could smash, no matter how hard they tried, because it wasn't a physical object. It was the essence of your being. At times, you may have felt like you were losing yourself in the chaos they created, but even in those moments, you were holding up that mirror. You were showing them that no matter how hard they tried to manipulate, control, or distort reality, there was still a piece of truth staring back at them. And maybe that truth didn't change them. Maybe they never acknowledged it, never softened, never grew, but that doesn't mean your role was meaningless, because what you were really doing was living out your truth in a space where falsehood reigned, and that is powerful beyond measure. It's easy to believe that being in the life of a narcissist was a punishment, some cruel twist of fate that left you battered and broken. But what if it was also a divine positioning? What if God placed you there not to suffer endlessly, but to play a role that went far beyond what you could see at the time? A mirror doesn't choose what it reflects, it simply shows what is there. You didn't choose their brokenness, their cruelty, or their denial, but by being yourself, you revealed it. And while that created conflict, it also created clarity. Because in seeing their darkness reflected, you also began to see your own light more clearly. The very qualities they despised in you, your ability to love deeply, to speak honestly, to feel emotions openly, were the same qualities that made you unshakable. These qualities became the evidence that you were not like them, that you had something within you they could never destroy. In reflecting their shadows, you also discovered your strength. You started to understand that their rage, their manipulation, their accusations were never really about you. They were about the war they were fighting within themselves. And in that understanding, even through the pain, you were winning. Your presence in the life of a narcissist was never about them winning. It was about you learning boundaries and self-worth. At first, it may not have felt that way because the relationship often began with confusion, self-doubt, and a sense of being overwhelmed. Narcissists are skilled at twisting reality, making you question yourself, and convincing you that the problem is always you. But in the middle of that chaos, there was a lesson unfolding, a lesson about where you end and where someone else begins. It was about discovering that your worth was never dependent on someone else's approval, validation, or recognition, but instead rooted in the undeniable truth of who you are. You may not have seen it clearly at the time, but every manipulation, every attempt to diminish your voice, every time you felt invisible or unworthy, was actually pushing you closer to the realization that boundaries are not optional. They are essential. Boundaries are the invisible lines that protect your peace, your dignity, and your energy. And when you were forced to face someone who had no respect for them, you learned the hard but powerful truth that you must be the one to establish and enforce them. That awakening doesn't come easily. It often comes through tears, through nights of questioning why you keep tolerating what hurts you, and through the exhaustion of giving too much. But as painful as that process was, it was shaping something unbreakable in you. Self-worth often emerges from the very places where it has been most attacked. When someone spends so much time trying to convince you that you are not enough, that you are difficult to love, or that you must change to be accepted, something inside eventually wakes up and refuses to believe the lie anymore. That awakening is like a spark, a sudden clarity that whispers, "I am more than this." And once that spark catches, it cannot be extinguished. You begin to see yourself differently, not through the distorted lens of the narcissist's words, but through the truth of your own resilience. Every insult becomes a reminder that you deserve kindness. Every attempt to silence you becomes motivation to speak louder. Every dismissal becomes proof that you are worthy of being seen. In many ways, the narcissist unintentionally became your teacher, not in the sense of guiding you with wisdom, but in forcing you to confront the parts of yourself that needed to be strengthened. You learned where your limits were. You learned that no is a complete sentence, and you learned that your value is not measured by how much you endure, but by how firmly you stand. That kind of learning only comes through trial, and though it was painful, it was transformative. What they thought was breaking you is actually building you. The victory in all of this is not that you endured their behavior, but that you emerged with a deeper awareness of your own worth. You discovered that you are not defined by someone else's inability to love you well. You realized that protecting your heart does not make you cold, it makes you wise. You understood that walking away from toxic patterns is not failure, it is freedom. And perhaps most importantly, you came to see that God never placed you in that relationship so you would lose yourself, but so you would finally find the courage to become who you were always meant to be. The pain you endured became the soil where resilience and courage grew roots. And while it may be hard to accept that anything good could have come from those experiences, it is often the hardest seasons of our lives that produce the deepest transformation. Pain has a way of stripping us bare, of removing illusions and forcing us to face truths about ourselves and others that we might otherwise avoid. When you were caught in the web of a narcissist's manipulation, you were confronted with a level of hurt and betrayal that shook you to your core, yet it was in those moments that the foundations of your strength were being laid. The tears you cried watered the very ground where your resilience was beginning to take form, and the struggles you endured became proof of just how much you could carry and still rise. Resilience is not born out of comfort. It is forged in the fire of adversity. Every time you were torn down with words meant to break your spirit, you learned to rebuild yourself. Every time you were made to feel small, you discovered how to stand tall again. The pain forced you to dig deeper into your own spirit, to call on reserves of strength you did not even know you had. That resilience became part of you, not as a surface-level toughness, but as a deep-rooted knowing that no matter how hard you are knocked down, you have the ability to get back up. This knowing does not come from theory or wishful thinking. It comes from lived experience, from surviving what once felt impossible. Courage was another seed that grew out of that soil. To live in the presence of someone who constantly questions your worth and challenges your reality requires courage, whether you recognized it or not. It took courage to wake up each day and face the emotional battlefield. It took courage to keep loving, even when love was not returned in a healthy way. It took courage to imagine a life outside of that relationship, a life where you could breathe freely without fear of criticism or control. Courage is not the absence of fear. It is the willingness to act even when you are afraid. And throughout your journey, you were exercising courage in ways you may not have even acknowledged. The beauty of resilience and courage is that they don't leave you when the pain ends. They stay with you and shape who you become. You now carry within you a strength that is unshakable because it was tested in the harshest of conditions. You hold a courage that whispers to you in moments of doubt, reminding you of everything you have already overcome. The pain that once felt like it would break you has instead built within you a foundation that cannot be easily shaken. What once felt like weakness is now the source of your greatest power. It is often said that broken places are where the light gets in, and your brokenness became the entry point for growth, healing, and transformation. Through your suffering, you learned compassion for yourself and for others who have walked through similar paths. You learned the value of rest, the necessity of self-care, and the importance of listening to your own voice above the noise of manipulation. These are not small lessons. They are life-altering truths that will continue to guide you long after the pain has faded. And while the narcissist may have believed they were breaking you down, what they were actually doing was unintentionally creating the conditions for you to rise stronger than ever before. Every scar became a reminder not of defeat, but of survival. Every wound became proof of your ability to heal. The soil of pain became fertile ground where your resilience and courage took root and grew into unshakable parts of who you are today. Walking away wasn't losing. It was claiming your victory and your freedom. For so long, you may have believed that holding on meant strength, that enduring the criticism and the manipulation was somehow proof of loyalty or love. You may have been told, directly or indirectly, that leaving meant you failed, that it meant you were giving up too soon, that it meant you weren't strong enough to stay and fix what was broken. But the truth is, walking away was never about weakness. It was about finally seeing the truth clearly and refusing to betray yourself any longer. Choosing to step away from the chaos was not abandonment of love. It was the most radical act of self-love you could offer yourself. The moment you made the decision to leave, whether it was physically, emotionally, or both, you shifted the balance of power. A narcissist thrives on control, on convincing you that your worth is tied to their approval, on keeping you tethered to their games. By walking away, you took that power back. You declared with your actions that their manipulation would no longer define you. You made the courageous choice to step out of a cycle that was designed to keep you trapped. And in doing so, you opened the door to reclaiming your peace, your joy, and your sense of self. That was victory, even if it felt terrifying in the moment. Leaving is rarely easy. It often comes after countless nights of doubt, after rehearsing conversations in your mind, after imagining what life might look like without them. You may have wrestled with guilt, asking yourself if you tried hard enough, if you were too much, if you could have done something differently to make it work. That inner battle is part of what makes leaving feel like loss, but in reality, it was the necessary doorway to your freedom. Walking away required you to silence the lies you were told and trust the quiet voice within you that whispered, "You deserve more than this." And trusting that voice was the truest form of victory because it meant you finally believed in your own worth. When you left, you didn't just walk away from a person, you walked away from patterns. You stepped out of cycles of blame, out of endless attempts to prove yourself, out of battles that could never be won because they were never really about you. You walked toward clarity, toward healing, toward the possibility of relationships built on mutual respect and love. That act of leaving was a statement to yourself and to the world that you would no longer settle for less than what you deserve. It was not the end of your story, it was the beginning of a new one where you are no longer a character in someone else's script, but the author of your own. The freedom you gained in walking away is not just about physical space, it is about emotional liberation. It is about waking up and realizing that you don't have to live under the weight of constant criticism. It is about breathing easier because you no longer carry the burden of someone else's brokenness. It is about rediscovering your laughter, your creativity, your passions, and the parts of yourself that were buried beneath the need to survive. Freedom means you can look in the mirror and see yourself clearly again, without the distortion of their voice in your head. That freedom is priceless, and it is the very proof that you won. Victory is not always loud or dramatic. Sometimes it looks like quiet mornings filled with peace instead of chaos. Sometimes it looks like smiling without fear of what will follow. Sometimes it looks like rebuilding your life one step at a time, learning how to trust yourself again and opening your heart to the possibility of love that is safe and real. Victory is not about proving the narcissist wrong. It is about proving to yourself that you were right to choose yourself, to choose healing, and to choose freedom. Every step you take away from the toxicity is a step toward the life God always intended for you, a life that reflects your strength, your dignity, and your ability to rise above what tried to keep you bound. God's plan was never for you to stay broken, but to rise stronger, wiser, and unshakable. When you look back at everything you endured, it may be hard to believe that strength could come from such deep pain. But that is often how transformation happens. Brokenness was not meant to define you. It was meant to shape you into someone who now carries wisdom that only comes from surviving what tried to destroy you. You were not left in the valley to wither. You were led through it so that you could climb to higher ground, carrying with you lessons and truths that will anchor you for the rest of your life. The cracks in your heart, the scars on your soul, they all became places where light could enter. In those broken places, you discovered the depth of your resilience. You learned that healing is not linear, that some days the wounds still ache, but that ache is also proof that you are alive, still moving, still choosing to rise. Wisdom comes from those very moments when you have to sit with your pain and ask what it is teaching you. It comes from realizing that you cannot change what happened, but you can change how it shapes you moving forward. That wisdom is what makes you unshakable because it is rooted in truth, not illusion. Being wiser now means you see through patterns you once overlooked. You no longer ignore red flags disguised as charm. You no longer confuse control with love. You no longer tolerate disrespect because you have learned that self-respect must always come first. This wisdom protects you, not by making you hard or bitter, but by making you discerning. You know the cost of ignoring your intuition, and now you trust it as the voice of God guiding you. You recognize that being whole does not mean being perfect. It means being aligned with your worth, being rooted in your values, and being unwilling to shrink yourself for the comfort of others. Strength has also become part of your identity. Strength doesn't mean you never cry, never doubt, or never struggle. It means you know you can survive the storm because you already have. It means that when life shakes you, you bend, but you don't break. It means that your spirit has been tested in the harshest conditions, and still, here you are, standing. Strength is not something that was given to you. It was revealed in you through the fire you walked through. And now it is yours to carry into every new chapter, a reminder of who you are and what you are capable of. Becoming unshakable is not about building walls. It is about building foundations. A house built on sand will fall when the storm comes, but a house built on rock will stand. Your foundation now is rock solid because it is built on truth, on self-worth, and on the unwavering knowledge that you are loved and valued beyond measure. You can walk into the future without fear of losing yourself again because you know the signs, you know your power, and you know that God's intention was always for you to live in freedom. You are no longer defined by what was done to you, but by how you rose from it. The brokenness was temporary, but the strength, the wisdom, and the unshakable spirit you carry now will last for a lifetime.